Hello, today I'm here to bring you the next instalment of my books that have ... series. I will link the playlist down below if you want to check out the other videos. So far I've done books that have changed my writing, books that have changed my reading, and books that have opened my eyes. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that have surpassed my expectations. I've, as usual, got 5 here. One of them's an audiobook, which I will start with, which is Louise O'Neill's Asking For It. I've kind of gone at this subject from the angle of books that have probably surpassed my expectations in terms of their genre for the most part, and this is definitely the case with this book. It's YA, which is a genre that I do not get on with. I think a lot of the tropes and the things used, I get why they would be appealing to teenagers, but for me they just don't work at all. I almost find them eye-rollingly irritating. So I generally stay away from YA books, and I stayed away from this one for a long time. I think it was last month I picked it up on audio and listened to it in barely any time at all. I really enjoyed it. It still had flaws, but I think that's kind of to be expected in a book that's written for a much younger audience. But I think this is a really important book. I think it's one that teenage girls should definitely be encouraged to read, and I wish it was around when I was a teenager. So this is a book that looks at rape culture. And our main character, Emma, she's not the most likeable teenager. She's kind of the popular girl in school. She likes to flirt with the boys and feel desired, and she sort of doesn't have any qualms about, you know, doing things with her friends' boyfriends and stuff like that. But something happens to her on a night out which is very much questionable. She either didn't give consent or can't remember giving consent, but some pictures emerged to show that she has had some sexual intercourse that she can't remember. And from the state of her in the videos, it's quite clear that even if she did give consent, she clearly was not in a position to do so. And it kind of looks at how the society turn on her, considering her reputation, and, you know, people sort of say that she was asking for it. And it looks at how she copes with that and how that impacts her life. And it's really interesting, and I think a really important book. And not only does it deal with Emma's case, but it also looks at a friend of hers very briefly, who has had a sexual experience that she didn't want to have. I don't know that you would call it rape, because she didn't say no, she did go along with it, but she wasn't comfortable with it. And I think that's something that probably teenage girls really need to hear about as well, is the fact that, you know, they don't have to do things that they don't feel comfortable with. I think, yeah, all round this is an important book, and it really didn't have the whole YA thing that I hate so much, and I think it helps as well because this didn't focus on trivial issues, which I think a lot of young adult books do, especially in terms of like romance and love triangles and all that rubbish. It just focused on a really important issue in a way that I think is accessible for a lot of young people. So that's the first on my list. Then, in keeping with the YA theme, I'm going to talk about a book which I read a very long time ago, and I haven't spoken about it in ages. That's Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler and Moira Kalman. Daniel Handler being Lemony Snicket, who wrote the series of Unfortunate Events. This is a book which is, again, a YA book, so I kind of went into it not expecting much, on top of which I really didn't enjoy the series of Unfortunate Events books that I've read, to the point where I gave the rest of the series away. I just couldn't get on board with them. So I was sceptical on 2 counts going into this. But basically, let me show you. This is a book that is basically a letter that a girl is writing to her ex-boyfriend, and she's giving him a box that are filled with all the things that were to do with their relationship, and it basically looks at each item and she explains what part it played in their relationship, and through that she kind of lets him go and reassesses everything that happened between them and looks at why they broke up. I would say it kind of falls into standards in the fact that the ending annoyed me a little bit. I feel like it kind of wasn't in character for the guy in question. I don't know, it kind of just, it felt too easy and it felt too horrible. But then at the same time, teenage boys aren't the nicest, and, you know, they're not the most honest and open with girls. So yeah, there was that slight niggle at the end, but I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I think it's one of those books that when I started reading it, I really thought it was just going to annoy me. It's quite written in kind of teen language and hipster language, as you like. I'm so old. But that kind of irritated me to begin with, but as soon as you really get into the pace of the book, it just completely, it doesn't bother you at all. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think it's a really well written and well thought through book, and I think for a teenage girl who's going through heartbreak, it's a really good one because it doesn't idolise the romance. It doesn't look at, oh, you know, we should be together forever. It's her quite harshly saying this is why we shouldn't be together and this is what I've realised. I think it would be, again, a really good one for a heartbroken teenager, and I would have really appreciated this when I was younger. Then we're on to different genres. So I've got crime here. I don't really read crime. It's not generally something that I would gravitate towards or pick up. I went through a brief period probably in my late teens where I quite enjoyed like fast-paced Dan Brown-esque kind of thrillers. Yeah, that fascination didn't last very long, but I've got one here which I've never spoken about. I think I read this when I was 20. It's a fair 6 years since I read this, and that is Elizabeth Haynes' Into the Darkest Corner. Now I picked up this, I don't know if anyone can remember the TV book club that used to be on Channel 4. I used to watch them avidly, loved that programme, and I used to just put all the books on my wish list, and this was one of them. And it's a crime novel about a woman who, she's had a bad experience with an abusive partner before, and she has moved on with her life. I think she's gone into witness protection and everything, but she's got OCD because of her experiences with him. So, you know, she always checks her everything. You know, she'll check her lock like 10 times before she goes to bed or before she leaves the house. She's always checking the windows, everything's in perfect order, and she starts to notice that little things are starting to move. For example, she'll get home and the door will be unlocked, but she knows that she checked it 10 times, and then it starts playing with her mind and she thinks, did I check it? Did I remember to do that? And then, you know, things like her knife drawer starts getting mixed up. And it's not clear whether her abusive partner has found her or whether she's just losing it a little bit or whether she's just becoming overly paranoid about it. But it's really creepy, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's really well written as well. It's quite literary. The writing is pretty good. And I think it's a crime that it's kind of one of those that gets under your skin rather than being blatantly gory or blatantly fast-paced. It's kind of a gentle creeping up on you and you're not quite sure what's going on until the end. I enjoyed it. Again, I would say that the ending was a bit predictable, but I often find that with crime books. You know, there's only so far that they can go at the end of the day. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. As crime books go, I would say this is my favourite of the lot. Then I've got a romance, which is Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. I read this even longer ago. Again, I think it's been about 7 years since I read this. But I don't, as a rule, pick up romance. I think it's, again, cheesy and predictable, and it's just not my cup of tea. But this book is a really fantastic romance because it kind of takes the genre and plays with it. I don't know how much I would enjoy this now, but at the time that I read it, I literally couldn't put it down. It was so good and I laughed out loud, and I felt like it was a romance that kind of was more realistic than the sort of far-fetched other romances of the world. So this is about a woman called Rachel. If I recall rightly, she's had a breakup and it's resulted in a drug addiction, and Rachel goes to rehab and it goes on from there. And I think the sort of difference in the setting of having her be a drug addict it really is effective, and it takes a whole different angle on this thing of romance. You know, I think in a lot of books like this, it's about a woman who's had a breakup, she's got a haircut, she's moved to a new city and she's moving on with her life, and this is not. Rachel's in a state, she's in a mess. And I think it adds a touch of realism. I really do like Marian Keyes' writing. She's not an author that I would associate with myself or that I would particularly hunt out anymore, but I think she's, as romance writers go, she's got a very comic voice and she's quite clever and witty. She's not vapid and sort of cliched. So as romance goes, I would say definitely search out Marian Keyes and certainly give Rachel's Holiday a go. And then this last book kind of is a cheat. It's not necessarily a book that surpassed my expectations because of the genre. That is The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. Obviously this is kind of a bestseller, which isn't something that I normally go for, so I suppose in that sense you could say that it surpassed my expectations of the sort of genre it's classified in, sort of popular fiction. The main reason that this surprised me is because a lot of people said a lot of bad things about The Miniaturist. Certainly on the booktube community I mainly heard negative things, and though it's an extremely popular book in terms of that it sold a lot and it's one of those books that was everywhere, even though the reviews on the Goodreads page aren't that good, I don't think that this is a generally liked book, but I actually was pleasantly surprised by it. I think the main issue with this book, and possibly the reason that it surpassed my expectations, is because it's marketed as a kind of book about the miniaturist, and people I think expect it to be fast-paced and about this magical miniaturist woman. Very much what it's marketed as. It's called The Miniaturist. It's got pictures of the little models that she makes, and on the back even it's all about the miniaturist. But the miniaturist is such a small part of this book. In fact, she's barely even a side plot. The main body of this book is about an 18-year-old girl who gets married to a man in Amsterdam, and she suddenly has to leave her house and her life and go and be the lady of the manor, as it were, and it kind of looks at the life that she has to fit into, and obviously there is the miniaturist on a sideline because her husband gives her a grand doll's house, and she hires the help of the miniaturist to make little dolls for the doll's house, and they start kind of predicting the things that are going to happen in this girl's life. But it's so much of a sideline that, to be honest, if you didn't have that aspect in the book, it still would hold together as a story. I was pleasantly surprised by this. I think Jessie Burton's writing is really fantastic as well. You know, a lot of the time bestsellers are not the best written, but I think Jessie Burton is a fantastic writer. I've spoken before about her blog, which I will link down below, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. I think it really shows just how good a writer she is. So yeah, there's that one. So that's all the books that I could think of that have surpassed my expectations in the past few years. Please let me know down below of any books that have really surprised you. I will see you next time. Bye!